So, The Acolyte, which is one of the latest Star Wars Disney Plus shows, has been canceled by Disney after just one season. This news comes about a month after the first, and now in retrospect only, season. About a month after this first season ended its 8-episode run. So it wasn't like a super, super long season. It's a pretty typical modern streaming season of really, really expensive episodes, but there's not a lot of them, as opposed to the old days where there would be like 20, 22 episodes a season, but they weren't necessarily super high budget, right? This comes as a semi-shock, in the sense that Deadline notes that showrunner Leslie Headland had already pitched ideas for a second season to Disney. And Variety notes that season 1, it ended with several cliffhangers that would have inevitably been answered or explored in further seasons, right? So let's do a little context here if you're not aware of like what's going on. So what is The Acolyte? So again, this is a Star Wars Disney Plus show. Here's the Wikipedia description of the premise, and it says, quote, "The Acolyte is set at the end of the Star Wars franchise's High Republic era, approximately 100 years before The Phantom Menace," so Episode 1. It sees a respected Jedi Master investigating a series of crimes that bring him into contact with a former Padawan learner and reveals sinister forces, end quote. Which is a really intriguing idea, right? When it came out, however, the critical reception was solid but not great, right? So it has about a 78% on Rotten Tomatoes, if you're from the UK. The critical consensus, it reads, quote, "Taking fresh risks with Star Wars lore while having infectious fun playing with the stylistic trappings of a galaxy far, far away, The Acolyte is a Padawan series with the potential to become a master," end quote. And unless something changes, that's not going to happen, right? So the critical reception was solid but not overwhelmingly positive. And then on top of that, viewership was also not super strong. It started fairly strong, but it just couldn't sustain the momentum. So on its first day of release, I think it launched with the first 2 episodes on the same day, which a strategy that I think they did with Obi-Wan as well, the Obi-Wan show. It had about 4.8 million views in its first day of release, and after the first 5 days, it had about 11.1 million, which was the biggest series premiere of 2024, but still below Ahsoka, right? The Ahsoka show on Disney Plus. Nielsen, like the company that tracks television watch data and obviously has moved aggressively into streaming, since that's become like the dominant way people consume television. Nielsen estimated that the first 2 episodes were watched for 488 million minutes during the week of June 3rd, which is like when it launched, which brought it in 7th place for that week. So good, it made it into the top 10, but not great, right? And that was kind of a high point. It kind of steadily declined week to week, though it did get a bump for the season finale. Which had an estimated 355 million minutes viewed, so not that much lower than that first week. But it is believed, we don't have like concrete data about this, but it's believed to be the lowest for any Star Wars show's season finale, at least in the streaming era, right? So that's kind of a bunch of business things, right? That it, was received well, but not overwhelmingly well. And it had good viewership, but not great viewership. But the big thing that everyone's been talking about is how polarizing it is. And, maybe that's not fair. Maybe I should say, though, how much it polarized fans, whether it really deserved to be polarizing or not, right? So some fans welcomed, a big thing about the show, as you can see from this image here, it furthered the Disney Star Wars era's imperative to make the Star Wars universe more diverse, right? Diverse in terms of gender, in terms of race, very loosely in terms of sexuality, but really in terms of race and gender, right? So of course, as we've seen, this is polarizing. So again, a lot of fans welcomed the increased diversity, right? A lot of people, there's a lot of, we think of nerds and nerd culture as being a very kind of like scrawny, nerdy, white, straight guys thing. But ultimately, nerd culture and Star Wars fandom specifically is so much more diverse than that. So there is an understandable excitement of seeing, someone that looks like you, seeing yourself represented in the media that you love most, right? So I think that really needs to be underlined here, right? Though I will say that sometimes those fans, not even those fans, but just people in general, will give content or media that is mediocre or even good, they'll give it a pass on a bunch of things in terms of quality because of those strides in representation, right? And ultimately, strides in representation and compelling television are not mutually exclusive, but they're not necessarily correlated. So something that is really innovative and revolutionary in terms of the representation it provides to marginalized communities does not a compelling television series make, right? So I would imagine that there's a lot of people that maybe are giving the Acolyte a semi-pass on certain elements in terms of how good certain cinematic elements are because they're just so enthused about that, right? But a lot of people, even beyond the diversity part, a lot of people just appreciated how the series challenged our ideas of the Jedi, right? Now, for there to be polarization, you have someone on one side, and then you have people on the other, and there was a huge backlash to this, as we've seen with Disney Star Wars since the reveal of a black stormtrooper as a main character, all the way back to that first Force Awakens trailer back like at the end of 2014, right? There's this certain segment of the Star Wars fandom that is very reactionary. Conservative is the wrong word because they're younger men. I don't want to use the word conservative, but this reactionary kind of, defensive posturing to, basically seeing these diversity efforts as, like going woke, right? And using that in a pejorative sense, right? So again, we've seen this for the past decade in terms of Star Wars. We've seen very blatant racism, sexism, and then also even if their attacks have nothing to do with identity politics, they will go after creators, even if they're just like straight white men, if they feel that they are tampering with what they feel Star Wars quote-unquote is, right? They have like a dogmatic adherence to what Star Wars quote-unquote is. And again, there is, how do I put this? There is justifiable, explainable, and defendable critiques you can have about a movie or TV show on a bunch of different artistic and formal elements. But if one of your issues is just that, oh, there's black people now in Star Wars, or there's more than you would want to see, right? Because we've always had black people in Star Wars, but it's always been like the one character, right? And, once your critique moves into that sphere, you kind of, what's the phrase? You kind of like undermine your point, or you kind of disqualify you from being taken seriously, frankly. So, like a lot of Star Wars properties and other just things in Hollywood of franchises that have quote-unquote gone woke, the show is review bombed on Rotten Tomatoes, right? So if you don't know what that is, review bombing is when you go on something like, it's usually on Rotten Tomatoes, but it really could be on any site that has people, like users rate, video games or movies or shows. And people go in droves, almost like they're like an army mobilizing, and leave bad scores so that the score tanks. The user score tanks, right? Again, it's often used by reactionary conservatives to protest inclusionary content. And it worked because right now on Rotten Tomatoes, the Acolyte currently has an 18% audience score, right? Like we said, the critical score from the kind of the aggregate analysis of reviewers that gave it positive reviews is like 78%. So that's a big difference that you can't just explain by, the critics are out of touch. This is very clear, like this is the playbook that people have been using for a decade. This is a concerted effort to damage the brand of something that they see is going too far, right? So on top of, complaining online and review bombing it, you have people now going after the cast and crew, right? So, the Hollywood Reporter notes that Headland, the showrunner, the director of, what was it, Sleeping with Other People with Alison Brie and Jason Sudeikis, which I thought was actually quite a good film. She's a lesbian, right? So, of course, people are going to go after her for that, even though it has nothing to do with this, really. And then Amanda Stenberg, who is pictured here, she's like one of the stars of the show, talked about kind of the hate that she's received, even leading up to it. Like, the show hadn't even come out yet. Just the trailer had come out. She had spoken on The View, kind of detailing her experience, and I have a quote here saying, quote, "It's been very painful to me. It's not something that I think you can emotionally prepare for. We welcome criticism of the show when it comes to storytelling or performance, but when it comes to death threats, horrific, violent, racist language, it's unacceptable to me," end quote. And I have to agree with her, right? Again, you can have legitimate creative critiques, but when it veers into any kind of bigotry, that's already, again, you've already disqualified yourself. And then death threats, well, now that's just illegal, right? Like, is it really that important? And I say this as someone who's devoting my life, and spent thousands of dollars going to a film school. Like, I've devoted my whole life to film. So I'm not saying film doesn't matter. But is this really a hill you want to die on? Sending death threats to a black actress just because it's making Star Wars woke? It just makes no sense to me. Now, full disclosure, and I buried the lead here so you wouldn't click away. I have not watched The Acolyte. Full disclosure. I am a busy man, and I've not been super enthused by Disney's Star Wars, like the Disney Plus Star Wars shows. I thought The Mandalorian Season 1 was fine. Like, I was already hating on it. Well, not hating. I already thought it was fine, if not mediocre, from Season 1. And the only thing I really liked is Andor. Just because it's so different, and it just, like, actually has, like, strong writing and direction, right? So I have not watched this, but it intrigues me, right? I'm intrigued by the textual elements, right? From reading that premise. The story seems really interesting. Like, not even just as, like, a new, fresh take on Star Wars, just in a vacuum, it just seems like this interesting kind of crime thriller idea, right? And I'm not opposed to challenging our conceptions of the Star Wars mythos, right? Star Wars is super important to me. It's it's Revenge of the Sith is the movie that made me want to make movies, of course, as I've said a million times. But I'm not opposed to reinterpreting the mythos. I might not always like it, but I'm not opposed to it in principle, right? Whereas, again, I feel like a lot of people are just opposed to it, like, just from the jump before they've even really seen, like, how it's done, right? But like a lot of things, especially when it comes to Star Wars and Disney content, ultimately it comes down to execution. A film is more than the script. A film is more than its story. A film is this kind of whole. The whole should be more than the sum of its parts. So just because it has an interesting story doesn't mean that the writing's going to be good, or the direction, or the performances, or the visual effects, or the pace. Like, there's so many other things about a story. Or film, rather. So, again, a lot of people prop up films and shows because of what, again, the scripts textually convey. Again, like the premise or like the story arc. But a lot of those same people will have very little regard for the formal elements of cinema. So, again, something could have really interesting ideas, but mediocre writing and direction and performances and all of that. And from what I've read in some of these reviews and kind of obituaries for The Acolyte, that seems to kind of be the sentiment with this. So I have a couple here. So IGN's 6 out of 10 review said, quote, "Brimming with strong ideas for new directions in the Star Wars universe, The Acolyte's first season is hurt by clumsy storytelling," end quote. Kotaku similarly wrote in their, not review, but like one of these post-mortem article said, quote, Star Wars The Acolyte was a divisive, uneven, and daring stab at a different type of Jedi story, end quote, right? So it's daring, but it's also uneven, right? There's this kind of tension between the potential and the execution. And going even further, Eric Kane at Forbes wrote, quote, "The show itself was not a hit largely because it was poorly written, riddled with plot holes, had very uneven acting from its various leads, and looked cheap despite its enormous cost," end quote. And I think that's a really salient point, is that, a lot of people are gonna point to this as, oh, the show was canceled because Disney gave in to the trolls. And that's partially true in an indirect way, which I'll talk about, but I want to put a pin in that. But just briefly, the real answer is just because it wasn't as successful as they wanted it to be. Now we can then discuss why it wasn't as successful. But I think Eric Kane at Forbes kind of puts it best, is that ultimately it's just not a stellar piece of television. And for the cost, to Disney, it just wasn't worth it. So why did Disney do this? Again, it reinforces that Disney... It's Disney catering to the worst parts of the Star Wars fandom, right? During this past decade of Star Wars content, even though The Force Awakens came out 9 years ago, again, we got that trailer in like the end of 2014, right? You know, over these 10 years, Disney and Lucasfilm have ranged from, at worst, catering and kind of giving in to the demands of like, you know, these, you know, kind of, for lack of a better word, bigoted trolls, at worst, but then also even just at best, not really defending those stars, right? Not really putting in the work to enable these new diverse cast members to be successful within the fandom. And ultimately, it's because they're a corporation. Corporations aren't your friend, and they don't really give a shit about any of this stuff anyway. Because again, even if Disney supports diversity, or they say they do, this decision, even though no official reason was given, this sends a signal to those trolls, intentional or not, that like this is because like good. This is because we spoke up and defended Star Wars from the woke mob, right? And again, it sends a signal that, you know, ultimately they're a corporation first. Social justice issues are tools in a corporation's toolkit. That is always secondary to the concerns of capitalism. So you see, after, you know, George Floyd's murder and, you know, very, very necessary social unrest and a social movement, speaking to the anger and the decades of systemic issues we have in this country, you have all these corporations posting black squares, talking about Black Lives, blah, 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 blah. The only reason why they were doing that, and it's called woke capitalism, is because they they felt that it would be good for business to do that. But when push comes to shove, they will always put the needs of capital first, right? And again, that speaks to the real reason why this happened, is ultimately the show just fell below their expectations. There's an estimated $180 million budget for this 8-episode season, which again would be a really big budget for a movie, let alone a TV show. And they wanted to see higher viewership. They wanted to see more viewers per dollar spent on this, and they weren't getting that. So, you know, to them, it wasn't worth it. So reactions to the cancellation obviously are as polarizing as the initial reception to the show was. So fans of the show were immensely disappointed. The hashtag renew the Acolyte began trending. I have a couple Twitter quotes here from people who are expressing their disappointment at this happening. At SW, as in Star Wars, at SW_holocron on Twitter said, quote, shocking and devastating Star Wars news today. The Acolyte has been canceled after one season. So many plot threads left unanswered. Darth Plagueis, the tie between Vernestra Rwoh and Khmer, Osha's turn to the dark side. So many more stories to tell. Hashtag renewed the Acolyte. End quote. At Richard Church 16 on Twitter said, quote, really sucks to hear the news of the Acolyte's cancellation. The show had a lot of promise, especially in its back half, and I was excited and intrigued to see where it would go next. Hopefully its story and characters can continue in some other form, but what a bummer. End quote. One more quote here from Twitter. At Kalen Real Life says, quote, the Acolyte has been canceled and I am baffled. I know a lot of weird people on the internet made it their whole personality to hate it, but it was genuinely some of my favorite Star Wars, period. Many people I know enjoyed it. Sad day, end quote. And again, that kind of speaks to the vibes of this, that, you know, there is like a reactionary outrage industrial complex that we've seen on YouTube where people make like a whole living like just complaining about woke things. And like, so a good example of this is like Brie Larson as Captain Marvel. Like that movie came out 5 years ago, and you're still seeing people using like a confused look on her or dumb look on her face as like the thumbnail, being like she was proven wrong. Like, all, like, it's like people, like, make it their whole personality to hate this stuff. It's like, you can hate this stuff if it sucks. Like, I don't really like Captain Marvel all that much, but not because it's woke. It's just because it's kind of a mediocre movie. So yeah, on the flip side, haters of the show rejoiced. I don't have any specific quotes from them, but they kind of all represent a similar sentiment that we've seen a lot recently. The quote-unquote, go woke, go broke. This idea that, if you indulge in social justice, you're gonna face the consequences as a company. But a lot of people point to the show's cancellation as just another sign of the current state of television, right? Again, streaming, the nature of streaming as the business model of it demands immediate success. And a byproduct of that is shows just don't have the opportunity to grow the way traditional broadcast television did, right? And if you just look within Star Wars, something like the Clone Wars had a really rocky start, and has now become beloved and is considered a cornerstone of what Star Wars is for a lot of people. Had that been made now, with a corporate kind of mind for it, because of course the Clone Wars, George Lucas is running everything, and he doesn't care about how successful it is at the jump. He's in it for the long haul. If that show was made today, that wouldn't have lasted after. For starters, it wouldn't have been 20 episode season. It would have been like 8 episodes, and it wouldn't have got renewed. So it does kind of speak to a larger issue with streaming. And one big reaction was from a writer, C.T. Jones, who is herself a black woman, works at Rolling Stone. And she wrote a big article that's gone semi-viral called, quote, "Can the best of Star Wars survive the worst of its fans?" End quote. And I've kind of cherry-picked a bunch of quotes to try to create a kind of almost like paragraph summation of the whole article. You should definitely go read the whole thing. But I'm just going to kind of read this amalgamized version here. That I developed here. She in her article says, quote, "What is crystal clear is that before Star Wars can have another successful show, the loudest voices online need to realize the Star Wars they want to return to never existed in the first place. The low audience scores, angry YouTube rants, and long Reddit threads can really boil down to one question: who determines what's real Star Wars? Extreme fans are creating a space where even the truest of Star Wars fans still wouldn't want to participate. If you thought you could make the next great Star Wars iteration, but you knew that your project could be lambasted simply for casting a person of color, is that where you would invest your time? The Star Wars fans clamoring for a return to the originals aren't just talking nonsense, they're ruining their chances to see the franchise they love grow in any meaningful way. The fans who are loudest at the moment aren't just willfully ignoring Lucas's original vision, they're making their own world smaller in the process," end quote. And I think that's really salient on her part. This idea that ultimately the fans who are most vocal in their hate are really shooting themselves in the foot long term. Because ultimately it's going to make Star Wars very, very narrow. That Disney is either not going to want to experiment, or they're not going to be able to find any filmmakers or writers that want to experiment. So Star Wars is always going to be in this weird stasis that they can't grow. And notably, most of the people doing this, again, like I said, are younger men. Like, by young, I mean maybe in their 20s or 30s. That's the generation that grew up with the prequels, dude. So, like, Star Wars literally changed, like, in your lifetime. So there's no issue with Star Wars changing. This idea of protecting Star Wars is really just a thinly veiled excuse for your bigotry. Sorry, I know that maybe this is going to piss people off. I know I'm a film news YouTuber, and a lot of the audience are probably going to be the same demographic that are causing these issues, but I just have to, I have to make this clear unequivocally. So will this show come back? Probably not. The only way it's going to come back is if people become nostalgic for it, so Disney can milk the nostalgia. Otherwise, if you really like this show, I'm sorry to report, it's over. But maybe I'll watch it, because maybe it sounds kind of neat. But maybe I won't, because it's not going to go anywhere. And it's going to have all this setup that's never going to have any payoff. So, I don't know.